Hello and welcome to round 13 of Pro Tour Khans of Tarkir. I'm Tim Willoughby here with Zach Hill, and our feature match area, the players are just about ready to start. Our first match on camera is going to be Masashi Osio of Japan up against Owen Turtenwald from America, the #2 ranked player in the pro rankings. Turtenwald on blue-black control up against a green devotion, or predominantly green devotion deck from Masashi Osio. Something that's been quite popular in one way or another with quite a few of the Japanese players.
Yeah, I'm looking at Osio. Yeah, he's on a deck a little bit different from a lot of the other Japanese players, a lot of whom are on a sort of Sidisi deck, a Delve deck. I'm digging the very, very, very old school white bordered forests. Osio kind of reminding everybody how many times he's been around the block. And Kiora's Follower, a card that, you know, obviously really, really powerful from just a raw power level context. It's better in like 3 ways than Voyaging Satyr, which we've seen at the top tables since it was printed. Exactly kind of the start that I think Osio is looking for.
And interestingly, depending on how much Owen knows about what Oizo's playing, he might think at this point that this is a Jeskai Ascendancy deck he's up against. Because that's very much a creature that's popular in those decks, as is Sylvan Caryatid.
Yeah, and one of the reasons to play those decks is, in fact, is to be able to kind of throw your opponent off. I mean, you see a start like this, you could be essentially mono green, but you know, if Osio got a white mana on the board, he'd be able to play a Jeskai Ascendancy right now. So definitely a little bit of a mind game. That said, this deck's plan far more about just tapping lots of mana and putting huge threats onto the battlefield. See Turtenwald with a disdainful stroke, though, able to counter anything Osio cast that cost more than 3.
16.
It's on the beat
Little glimpse there at Oizo's hand. Able to just attack with that Kiora's Follower, perfectly fine option there. He's got Court of Calling, Prophet of Crufix, and Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. Any of those spells are going to get countered, along with the Nylea in his hand, by Owen Turtenwald's counter magic package available to him. So let's see what Osio wants to fire off with first.
So he's throwing a Prophet of Crufix out there. Doesn't look like he really expects it to resolve. On the other end, I mean, if Owen's plan is to just throw out a Perilous Vault, oh, okay, or Bile Blighted, that way he gets to save his Disdainful Stroke for something that doesn't bite the dust to -3/-3.
Yeah, plenty of creatures in the green decks that are big enough to survive a Bile Blight. So that a smart heads-up play from Owen Turtenwald, who has much experience casting Bile Blight, though traditionally more likely in mono-black devotion for him.
Yeah, definitely a card he's played with plenty of times. Absolutely dominated last season for almost the entire year with variants of mono-black control. We see Osio also on a mulligan right now, so if you're looking at his hand saying, why does he only have 2 cards in it, that's exactly why. I mean, this is exactly the situation Turtenwald wants to be in. I think he's got, you know, a Perilous Vault on the battlefield, a handful of counter magic. He's really not under much of a clock. I think Osio is going to try to get a Court of Calling out to try and Reclamation Sage that Perilous Vault, buy him at least a little bit of time.
Yeah, I mean, even though this version of green with blue in it is a little bit unusual, I think that in terms of what Owen Turtenwald's going to want to do to fight it, it's kind of similar to a lot of other green devotion builds. That Perilous Vault will be very powerful, assuming that it can stay around. But it looks like Owen is saying, yeah, it's kind of okay for you to cast Court of Calling. Let's see what you're gonna fetch.
And having access, I mean, one of the things we've seen in the feature match area, Tim, is how powerful access to main deck artifact destruction is. We saw Utter End do some work for Raphael Levy, allowing him to take that first match against Cuneo, and now Reclamation Sage gives him the possibility of advancing his board while continuing to clock Owen with that Kiora's Follower. I'm also looking at Oiso's hand. He's got a clever Impersonator, meaning that if Owen taps out for another Vault, possibly thinking like, oh, okay, Oiso's used his 1 artifact kill spell, Osio could just do it again.
Oh, wow, that's pretty exciting. Clever Impersonator, not a card that I've seen yet in Standard really doing a great deal, but
14.
This seems like the sort of deck that would be able to achieve something pretty big with it.
So Owen right now, I mean, has a lot of options. It looks like he's cracking a Polluted Delta right away, so probably tending to tap low on this turn.
There's another Perilous Vault. Let's see whether or not Osio can make Lightning Strike twice here.
Does he have? Yeah, he's got access to double blue mana courtesy of Kiora's Follower and Sylvan Caryatid. And I think, Oiso, you just have to pull the trigger here.
Yeah. While, I mean, it would be reasonable to say that Owen may not have expected the first piece of artifact removal. The second piece has to just be backbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not playing around Clever Impersonator. I mean, it's just not a card that you're like, oh, this is what I need to be mindful of.
So Oiso is taking damage here from
Wow.
having to tap his lands for blue mana there, but it kind of worth it to keep his board around. 2 Perilous Vaults down, and enough power on the board here for Masashi Osio that he doesn't need to do too much to close this first game out.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about how Oiso's clock wasn't that impressive. Suddenly he has 6 power on the board. Owen has access to a Bile Blight. He's holding Pearl Lake Ancient, but he only has 6 mana, so he's going to need another land next turn if he's going to cast that. Dissolve, Disdainful Stroke, very good against Oiso's deck, but not going to shore up the board. Bile Blight, of course, taking out 2 of those attackers due to the fact that even though one's Clever Impersonator, one's Reclamation Sage, when Impersonator copies the Sage, it actually gets its name also. So Bile Blight able to generate a 2-for-1 for Turtenwald.
Cold comfort there for Owen Turtenwald as he's still having to face down attacks and doesn't have any Perilous Vaults to help him at this point. So single digits now for Owen Turtenwald. Masashi Osio showing that just because he's been away from the Pro Tour for a while does not mean that he's got any rust left in the way that he's playing there as he casts an Arbor Colossus straight into Disdainful Stroke from Owen Turtenwald.
Now the question here, if you're Oiso, is whether you want to cast a threat there or wait till your opponent's at 7 mana. Because if you're doing that and force him to counter your Arbor Colossus at 7, that means that you're not getting hit with a Pearl Lake Ancient. On the other hand, obviously, being able to enhance your clock earlier on is better if your spell resolves. But it looks like he was going ahead and saying, okay, I guess I'll need to make you show me the counter. Now, of course, Owen has access to Pearl Lake Ancient on this turn if Oiso simply attacks with the Kiora's Follower.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. I mean, it's something that, in some respects, the entire line that Masashi Oizo's Green Devotion deck is taking full stop is saying, I've got a lot of threats. I'm going to continue to deploy said threats because if you deal with one, there's a very real chance I have another. So with an extra draw step, he could very well have just found something that, just like Arbor Colossus, he could play and just keep on churning out something that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, on the other end, I mean, you haven't really seen much counter magic from the blue-black deck so far. There's been a lot of draw steps. You have to expect your opponent to be able to play that, and you really don't want to give him access to a scry with a card like Dissolve if you don't have to. So, I mean, then again, too, not everybody's playing Pearl Lake Agent. We've seen blue-black decks kill with Ashiok. We've seen blue-black decks kill with Prognostic Sphinx. So the Ancient, not necessarily a card you're even playing around.
We see here Oizo is actually taking a step away from the table, just checking something with a judge. That's something that you always have the prerogative to do in Tournament Magic. If there's a ruling that you're unclear on and you don't want to screw anything up, often it's safer to just ask the question, maybe away from the table so your opponent doesn't hear, and make sure that you make the right play first time.
Well, yeah, you definitely want to ask the judge before you make a play, as opposed to having that confusion hit you afterwards once you already committed to it. That's a really easy way to lose a match.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're in a position where you can make a play, but then it gets rolled back because it's illegal, you've given up information that you just didn't need to give up. So Oizo now has his plan. Let's see what that is as he looks at his hand and goes to enact it. So Nylea, God of the Hunt, is his play.
And that's, again, Owen thinking now about precisely how much does he care about that Nylea, because he wants to get Pearl Lake Ancient on the battlefield as soon as he can, doesn't want to get hit for another turn by that Kiora's Follower falling all the way down to 6. So I think if you're Owen, you're thinking just how much does Nylea bother me? If Oiso's able to start leveraging that Nykthos, Nylea's ability could get out of hand real quick. As it stands, though, Nylea not a creature with only 3 blue devotion, and it looks like Owen's saying, look, I'm not going to worry about it. I want to get Ancient on the board.
Are you suggesting that Owen Turtenwald might not be afraid of a 2-2 trampling Kiora's Follower?
I think it's a little bit more about the potential for what that can do later. Now, we see Oiso definitely playing around the Pearl Lake Ancient, not attacking after that Nylea resolves.
So Owen here, this all at the end of Oizo's turn, casting that Pearl Lake Ancient, immediately gets a chance to untap. And that one of the reasons that Pearl Lake Ancient, a great choice for a finish of a blue-black control, you'd never need to cast it at a time that's bad for you. You can wait until the very end of your opponent's turn, and effectively it has haste. And then it can't be countered, great in a control mirror. It can protect itself. If you've got lands to return to your hand, you can return those lands along with the Pearl Lake Ancient to keep it safe from removal. So a very resilient finisher for control decks.
I also love all the synergies that the Team Channel Fireball Pantheon deck has with Pearl Lake Ancient. They've got scry lands, they've got ways of gaining 1 life, they've got ways of gaining 2 life. So he's actually able to turn that drawback that you have to incur to return it to your hand into a bit of an upside.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily an engine that you want to have running all the time. You don't want to run out of fuel in terms of lands by bouncing them all the time. But knowing that the lands that you're returning you're going to gain extra value off is certainly not nothing.
What Owen wants to draw right now is just a dig through time or a Jace's Ingenuity. He's stabilized the board, but without any way of getting ahead, I mean, can't really afford to trade 6 damage for 2 damage because of the threat of Nylea's activation. Now, it looks like he's going to attack. Maybe what he's going to do is just attack, float mana, pick up his lands, and play his Pearl Lake Ancient untapped just to have access to another scry. It's like a very expensive vigilance on the Ancient.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and
yeah.
It looks like that's the play there. So he taps 3 lands, floats mana, bounces lands in order to bounce his Pearl Lake Ancient, and then flashes it back in.
Right, and that's going to give him 3 separate scries. So for the next two turns, including plus this one, it's as though he gets to look at 2 separate cards for every draw step.
So it's expensive vigilance plus a lot of scrying.
Right. It's like build your own prognostic Sphinx attack, except with a 6/7.
So Oizo here left with a few things to think about. A very, very strong player that has a huge number of Pro Tour top 8s already, though none of them particularly recent. We haven't seen him on the Pro Tour quite so much in recent years as he's been up to other bits and pieces in his native Japan, as opposed to Owen Turtenwald, who had very, very nearly made it to being Player of the Year. I mean, he kind of snuck up and overtook Reed Duke to take the US champion title at the end of the last Pro Tour. And here we see him scrying to try and find a way of winning this matchup against Masashi Osio.
Yeah, Owen had a pretty decisive Pro Tour Magic 2015, and really just one of the best players active over the last several years. Hard to talk about Magic in the modern day without talking about Owen Turtenwald. We see Oizo finally tapping some mana. I mean, he really needs to get some green mana symbols onto the board to take advantage of that Nykthos.
Well, if you're looking for green mana symbols, you'll struggle to find a card that has more of them on it than Arbor Colossus. In terms of the ones that Nykthos counts, it only counts the ones in the casting cost, but there are 3 of them up there, and for 3 colorless and green, 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 you get to make it monstrous, shoot a creature up out the sky, and just it will be a bigger, scarier threat for Owen Turtenwald to deal with.
No, and this gives him access to another scry. Still got a Temple of Deceit in reserve, so Owen, I mean, eventually, the more he gets to scry and while keeping the board neutral, he's eventually going to draw into dig through time and be able to put this game away.
Yeah, the dissolve there stopping Arbor Colossus means that Masashi Osio really doesn't have too much in the way of action for attacking. And sooner or later, Owen Turtenwald will find all of the tools that he needs to put this game away unless Masashi can do something decisive pretty soon.
We see him draw Perilous Vault. I mean, Perilous Vault is what you need to clear the board out. Yeah, and that's what he casts. So this means that he can attack with Pearl Lake Ancient, bounce it, activate Vault to clear the board, and have a clear pathway through with that Ancient, unless Oizo is able to get some really strong draws.
It sounds like this might be the round where we hear the positive results from the blue-black control decks, because in addition to what we see on screen at the moment with Owen going on, Ivan Flock is currently a game up against Brad Nelson over on one of the back tables. Our text feature match being covered by Mark Calderero. Also, Spencer Garnier is a game up against the King of the Hill, Yuya Watanabe. So that one the crown moving around a little bit more today than it did yesterday, potentially.
Yeah, it seems like it. Now, this is a big turn for Oiso. He's now got access to 5 green mana symbols for his Nykthos, plus Kiora's followers, so he's able to generate a lot of mana to finally start taking advantage of that Nylea God of the Hunt. Nylea herself also able to attack now, not able to attack through Pearl Lake Ancient, but in concert with Kiora's follower, can actually get through some damage. Owen at 8, able to absorb a single Nylea hit, but not a Nylea pump. So a timely draw for Oiso. And Owen, 2 mana short of being able to activate Perilous Vault.
Yeah, and basically this is Masashi Oiso's window to win this game. Once the Perilous Vault becomes active, it becomes much, much more difficult for Masashi Oiso to finally get through those last points of damage. So he's thinking very carefully about exactly how he wants to do his attacks here.
Now, crucially, does Nylea grant herself trample or other creatures? Because if she grants herself trample, that means that Owen can't pick up Pearl Lake Ancient after blocking Nylea.
Now, much like a lot of the gods, Nylea grants all of the other creatures you control trample. So only 1 trample on the board. It's a 2/2 at present.
Oh yeah, it's 2 lands.
Yeah.
You played 2 lands this turn.
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness. It looks like there's been a bit of confusion around Courser of
4/4,
Crufix.
and then you can't play the land.
Correct.
So, I mean, that is a big deal.
Well, you should get a warning. Tried to play 2 lands.
Yeah.
You see that.
I forgot. Okay, well, you'll receive a warning for a game rule violation. You'll receive a warning for a failure to maintain game state.
So it looks like some warnings being given out due to the playing of the lands from Courser of Crufix. I mean, but that's a big moment. I mean, every mana matters right now with Nylea the Hunt on the battlefield. Nylea God of the Hunt.
So Oiso here just trying to work out exactly what position he's in now and what he can do, because everything we said previously about this being his window remains true.
So 4/4/6/6.
Yeah.
Right, and so the question is, you know, if Owen blocks Kiora's follower, he can kill Kiora's follower, but take 6 from Nylea. If he blocks Nylea, he can't kill it.
Indestructibility is pretty powerful like that. Yeah, he'll just be taking whatever damage that he is due, which looks like 4 damage from that Kiora's follower, falling to 4 life, which is, I mean, these green decks don't necessarily have a lot of reach in the traditional sense, but still it's not a huge amount of life to be sat on.
So that Hero's Downfall, a meaningful draw for Owen. We have to expect to see an attack from Pearl Lake Ancient. And Owen, I mean, you know, the intuitive play if you're Oiso is to block, because that means that, you know, you think your creature is going to die to Perilous Vault anyway. On the other hand, if you block, you're not necessarily forcing a Perilous Vault activation, but it looks like that's what Owen's going to want to do.
So he's floating some mana there, bouncing his Pearl Lake Ancient. This now means that the Perilous Vault effectively a one-sided board sweeper.
Right. I mean, I am very impressed with Pearl Lake Ancient. This is the first time I've really seen it do a lot of work. And we see that vault happening on the draw steps so that Oiso doesn't get an additional card by playing that land off the top of his deck.
Just need to make sure that the top card of the deck gets turned face down there. There we go.
And here it is. I mean, now you see the pace of Owen playing, attacking with that Ancient. Oiso at 13, so that means if Owen's able to play a spell during his main phase next turn, that's going to be all she wrote.
Yeah, that prowess will be enough to make the Pearl Lake Ancient into a 7/8, and with just 7 life after attacks, that would be enough. But an Elvish Mystic here, a perfectly reasonable blocker. Oh, except for that Hero's Downfall, and with prowess, that is the game. So Owen Turtenwald finds a way through and able to take the first game up against Masashi Osio. So that's the end of the first game there between Owen Turtenwald and Masashi Osio. We'll be able to give you a look in on some of the other games shortly, but before that, here's just a couple of messages.
Ultra Pro is the place to go for all your Magic accessories. With card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and portfolios showing off the best Magic art, Ultra Pro is the standard in safe storage. Visit ultrapro.com for more information. Take what you've learned from watching the Pro Tour to your local store for the Khans of Tarkir Game Day happening October 18th and 19th. Visit wizards.com/magicgameday for more information.
Hello and welcome back to round 13 of Pro Tour Khans of Tarkir. While Masashi Osio and Owen Turtenwald do their sideboarding for game 2 of their matchup, we're going to have a little bit of a look in over at one of our other games here. On the left of our screen, that is Pro Tour Magic 2015 winner Ivan Floch. He's playing blue-black control as well. He's a game up against Brad Nelson with red-white tokens. And while Brad's deck is a very aggressive deck in game 1, in game 2 it can become something of a control deck, and here it looks like there is Elspeth, Sun's Champion, on the stack with Ivan Floch trying to work out what to do about it.
Yeah, Nelson basically has access to In Hostilities and Elspeth and Chandra after board after a very aggressive start game 1. It looks like he did opt to transform or just to say, look, I'm going to play some Elspeths because it's a threat you must counter. But anytime that you see a board this clear for Floch, who you're always assuming is playing some kind of control deck, that is probably good for Ivan.
And thinking about win conditions for the blue-black control deck, this one looks to be Prognostic Sphinx for Ivan Floch, so a little bit of a different plan than the Pearl Lake Ancient option being run by the Channel Fireball team.
I know another thing of that deck, when I talked to Stanislav Sivka about it, plays 4 main deck copies of Disdainful Stroke, which not really a card that you can use to counter the Swift Spear. And the Swift Spear 1-2 battling courageously into that Prognostic Sphinx.
Yeah, kind of an interesting challenge here for Ivan Floch in terms of working out what he wants to do. With 5 mana up, there's a very real chance that Brad Nelson could have a trick that both pumps the Monastery Swift Spear and potentially does some damage to the Prognostic Sphinx, meaning that it's not a particularly safe block.
It looks like he's going to make it, though. I'm really interested in seeing what Brad has here.
Well, Titan Strength seems pretty good. So that's +3/+1 just from the spell itself, and then Prowess on top of that makes it enough for the trade. But a negate here from Ivan Floch seems to be going over the top unless there's something else that Brad Nelson can do.
Well, all Brad has to do is cast any spell here to give the Swift Spear enough toughness to survive, even though the Titan Strength gets countered. So the question is just, does Brad have anything? Yeah, and it looks like he does.
So Stoke the Flames there. We're not quite sure which direction, so we'll try and find out the life totals on this match, because Brad Nelson's deck is one with a lot of explosive power, and that means that even if the board looks kind of in Ivan Floch's favor, it may well be that actually things are kind of a bit trickier.
And it looks like Floch is at 12 life, so a little ways to go for some of Brad's burn spells.
But the Monastery Swift Spear card, we've already seen doing some good work, even in the likes of Legacy. It's kind of the spiritual successor to Goblin Guide as a 1-mana haste creature that frequently attacks for more than 1 damage. And a nice pickup for burn decks in just about every format imaginable.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to playing that card alongside my Goblin Guides and Modern Burn. It's a lot of damage.
A huge amount of damage, yeah, and difficult to play around all that haste as well. So the Swift Spear here coming in again. And this time there's a Bile Blight, so it's going to take a few spells to survive a Bile Blight for Monastery Swift Spear. I'm guessing that Brad's probably going to say, unless I've got burn that I want to send at the head anyway, I'm probably going to let my 1-drop die. But in the meantime, it's forced an awful lot of activity from Ivan Floch that realistically I'm not sure how much of it he really wants to have to deploy.
Well, and this is interesting for Brad. I mean, Floch just gave you the option, essentially, of using all those burn to keep Swift Spear alive, because he could have done that on his main phase. So you have to be thinking, if you're Nelson, like, why is Floch letting me untap and try to keep Swift Spear alive?
Well, I guess we'll have to listen to our floor reporter, Marshall Slapke, to find out updates in that game, because we are now ready to go back to our main game between Masashi Osio and Owen Turtenwald. The blue-black control deck of Turtenwald currently 1 game up against the Japanese Hall of Famer on mono-green control with mono-green devotion, with just a little bit of blue going on for a few neat little tricks.
Yeah, and we're so happy with what he sees on the top of the library, not scrying it away. It's never what you want to see when your opponent plays a turn 1 Scryland. You know your opponent's got some gas in the tank.
So Evolving Wilds here from Owen Turtenwald, finding his first land. And it's It's starting out with a Swamp, which means that potentially he can get Bile Blight in play a little bit earlier, but Dissolve perhaps a tiny bit slower. Having that ability to fetch lands basically just meaning that he can more consistently have the right number of each color at the right moment.
Also very relevantly, Evolving Wilds puts a land into the graveyard to help fuel delve cards like Murderous Cut and Dig Through Time, in addition, of course, to Polluted Delta in that cycle. So Evolving Wilds essentially netting you a mana later on, doing a lot of work for 2-color decks.
So a Thoughtseize here revealing that actually there's quite a lot of lands in Masashi Oizo's hand. He's got a Court of Calling, a Reclamation Sage, and Prophet of Krufix, all of those cards that we saw in Game 1 as well. It's just really a matter of what Turtenwald is most concerned with here. It would be tempting to me to take the Reclamation Sage because that would be a creature that, as and when it gets cast, would be a must counter, chances are.
Right, and it can deal with those Perilous Vault.
It sounds like Brad Nelson has been able to level things up against Ivan Flock. He had Stoke the Flames and Lightning Strike to burn out the Pro Tour champion. So that one is going to be going to a Game 3.
Now, I really like Owen taking the Court of Calling here. You know your opponent knows his entire deck list and is able to basically kind of trick you with the Court of Calling. Without knowing what all of Oizo's one-ofs are, being able to take Court of Calling allows Owen to play around the hand that he knows around. It just sort of simplifies the game state and doesn't give Oizo access to whatever's most suitable at the time. I mean, this is a game that's going to go long, so Court of Calling going to be able to get essentially anything out of Oizo's deck on down the road.
It's interesting, actually, that even though Owen Turtenwald drew another Thoughtseize there, he chose not to deploy it. I guess that basically he's comfortable enough with what else he saw in Oizo's hand and wanted to at least represent having a Dissolve on any potential threats coming from Oizo.
Right, and being able, he wants to be able to use Dissolve if Oizo top decks a bigger threat. And knowing about Reclamation Sage is huge, because now he's not going to expose his Perilous Vault to being vulnerable unless he has to. Meanwhile, Prophet of Krufix, on the one hand, powerful for Oizo because it allows him to operate at instant speed. On the other hand, doesn't really represent much of a clock in and of itself, so Owen knows he's going to have some time to be able to start drawing into card drawing spells and extend this game and eventually get his Pearl Lake Ancient engine going. I mean, he's just under no pressure right now.
Yeah, Murderous Cut there dealt with Kyora's follower. He's got the time for the Thoughtseize now and gets another look to see there's really not much going on from Masashi Oizo's side of things. Owen has already managed to find his copy of Perilous Vault, so even though he's left that Reclamation Sage in Masashi Oizo's hand, he's got the information that he needs to play around it.
Right, and now he has the mana he needs to hold up Hero's Downfall, so I mean, it's going to be very, very, very hard for Oizo to stick anything relevant on this board.
Yeah, Oizo might well have to kind of sneak through smaller creatures like the Voyaging Satyr has just cast and kind of do little plinks and plonks of damage here and there rather than the one big threat that perhaps mono-green decks are most well known for.
Yeah, it's interesting, this Voyaging Satyr, because we've seen Kyora's follower and Satyr. He's got one copy of Satyr and one copy of follower, so I think he was just like, look, I want to make sure that I have X amount of green mana accelerants that don't require me to have blue mana. And, I mean, but Satyr obviously quite a bit worse when it's doing what it is now, it's just trying to beat down.
Yeah, the 1-2 is a pretty slow clock when it comes to actually finishing off opponents. And even though Owen Turtenwald, on paper, is losing on 13 life compared to the 20 of Masashi Oizo, this is kind of exactly what the blue-black control deck wants to be doing. It wants to just say, if you're doing anything, you're not doing anything much, I have time to sculpt a great hand and deal with the threats that are actually going to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, as a blue-black control deck, if you could enter into an agreement with your opponent, you're just like, look, I'm going to take 1 damage every turn, but you're not going to do anything else, you would opt into that in a heartbeat. And wow, Jace's Ingenuity, a big draw from Owen, allowing to give him access to the raw cards that he needs to start putting this game away.
Yeah, Jace's Ingenuity there. Instant speed, drawing 3 cards. And instant speed, very, very important. Being able to cast that card drawing spell at the end of Masashi Oizo's turn means that Owen Turtenwald never puts the shields down at a point where Oizo can really do too much.
And we see, you know, Reclamation Sage over there in Oizo's hand. No real targets for it. Owen doesn't have 7 mana, so Oizo knows he can attack relatively freely with that Voyaging Satyr, but getting Owen all the way down to 12, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, and at some point when Pearl Lake Ancient does come down, there's a very real chance that it can act as a gigantic Flame Tongue Kavu, eating the biggest creature that Masashi Osio is attacking with. And then it can actually take fairly sizable chunks out of Masashi Oizo's life total itself when it starts to swing back the other way.
I mean, right now, if you're Owen, you just want to dig into Ancient. You've got all the lands you need. You got all the removal you need. You have enough mana to play and activate Perilous Vault in one turn. That's something you're at all interested in doing.
A couple of results from some of the other tables. It sounds like all of the other matchups that we have going on in the feature match area are going to Game 3. Yuya Watanabe is in Game 3 now against Spencer Garnier, and Christian Seibold has just won with his Sidisi deck up against Joel Calafel, so that one will be going to Game 3 as well. Lots and lots of action here in our feature match area here in round 13. And look at that. That is a pretty sizable Genesis Hydra coming from none other than Masashi Osio.
And Genesis Hydra big because that you trigger the ability on casting the spell. So you're going to have 2 threats no matter what. And Owen is 1 mana short of being able to play and activate Perilous Vault on the same turn. So Owen has some big decisions to make here. Does he want to use his counter magic and his hero's downfalls on the Hydra and the Colossus? Or does he want to take a gamble and bet whether he has a land on top of his library, which allow him to get use out of that Perilous Vault and hold the counter magic and downfalls for bigger threats?
So yeah, with X's 6 on Genesis Hydra, Masashi Osio able to put a card with a mana cost of 6 or less onto the battlefield. That one's not going to get countered. And then the 6/6 itself, in principle, can get countered, but one way or another, it looks like Owen here is going to say, I'm going to have a different way of dealing with the threats that Masashi Osio is deploying.
And those are the downfalls that are in his grip.
12.
Oh man, I enter the battlefield tap land, not what Owen wanted to see, but with Dissolve and Negate, a downfall and a Vault in his hand. That basically means he's going to take 7 damage, go to 4, he knows that Oizo doesn't have any burn, and play the Vault out next turn.
5.
So Owen dropping to single digits here, not necessarily in the safest place on paper in terms of looking at the board, but the last 5 points are going to be substantially harder for Masashi Osio to deal than any of those that have come thus far in this match, really.
Well, yeah, this is not a deck like, what is it, Jeskai Winds or like Red White Burn. I mean, Oizo doesn't have a deck full of Stoke the Flame and Lightning Strike and Magma Jet, so dealing those last 5 points of damage is going to be a lot harder than it would be for some of the other decks in the room.
Especially when the last 5 turns into the last 6 as Dismal Backwater gains Owen Turtenwald another life here.
So now Oizo does have room to resolve a spell right now. If there's anything he can cast, he knows Owen can't counter it, but it looks like he is just not able to capitalize on this opportunity. He's playing a Reclamation Sage just as a 2/1 creature.
Yeah, I mean, once you've seen that one of the Perilous Vaults is gone and you know that you only need to deal 6, just casting it as a 3-mana 2/1 is certainly defensible. And if he draws into the likes of a Nylea, he can cast it, immediately pump, and that could be the game.
That's exactly right, Tim. Yeah, I mean, even though it's only a 2/1, he only needs 3 attacks. So Owen forced to use a hero's downfall just on the 3-mana 2/1.
Yeah, normally I wouldn't describe that as being a hero, but yeah, it met its downfall just like anything else. And a very fast negate there from Owen Turtenwald on Nissa Worldwaker. Owen knows what he needs to do now. He's just trying to make sure that Masashi is now living completely off the top of his deck. Thoughtseize getting rid of the last card in Masashi Oizo's hand. And with 2 counter spells in Owen Turtenwald's hand, and I think he just drew a Dig Through Time. This exactly where the control deck wants to be.
Yeah, Dig Through Time, the best draw you could have there. This is probably going to give him access to Pearl Lake Ancient and 7 cards, as well as another counter spell if he wants it. I could also try to find Perilous Vault. I mean, we have to see what's in these cards, but Dig is just so good right here.
Yeah, I mean, you're only literally drawing 2 cards for the spell you've cast, but those 2 cards are the best 2 of your top 7. So if you compare that to casting the likes of a Sphinx's Revelation or similar, Sphinx's Revelation would sometimes draw you lands, and sometimes you didn't need those lands. You know, not to disparage Sphinx's Revelation at all, a very, very powerful spell indeed. But actually, Dig Through Time, even though it gets you a comparatively small number of cards, the extra selection you get there means that sometimes it feels like you're casting double Demonic Tutor for blue-blue at the end of your opponent's turn.
And is that good, Tim? Is that powerful?
Sometimes it's good enough.
You know, and not finding a finisher there, but drawing just more counter magic. Rule says, wow, and another dig through time. Can't really fire it off for 2 men on his main phase like he could last time. But you have to believe that this dig is hitting on Oiso's end step.
Yeah, it's one of those things that having to dig to find answers is one thing. Having to dig to improve an already winning position is just terrifying.
And we see him leaving open exactly 5 mana. That means if he draws into Jace's Ingenuity, he can cast it. So Owen really kind of able to tailor make his draws right now. And we see a bunch of lands. We see he's got really all the counter magic he needs. And there's the Pearl Lake Ancient. So we have to expect him to take that and ship everything else to the bottom. The other great thing about Dig is that, you know, the deck only plays 2 Pearl Lake Ancient to win, but because you're shipping cards that you know about to the bottom of the deck, you're not going to run into that situation where you just have, you know, 2 Pearl Lake Ancients in the bottom 5 cards of your library and you can't win in time.
Yeah, once you've found the Pearl Lake Ancient, you almost inevitably have some stuff that you weren't as worried about sat on the bottom there, just chilling out, meaning you're not going to die to decking.
And there it is.
So Masashi Osio here really leaning hard on the top of his deck trying to find something. And Yisan the Wanderer Bard, this is an interesting one. If it hangs around, it can certainly generate a fairly substantial advantage, but I can't help but think that Masashi Osio is not surprised to see a dissolve dealing with the legendary human rogue.
And we see now Nissa the World Waker in Oiso's hand. Looks like Oiso just does not want to run it into a Pearl Lake Ancient or into a counterspell he knows about. Wow, and Thoughtseize from Owen.
I mean, that's one way to deal damage to Owen, right?
What's that?
Owen is saying, I'm not too worried about my life total here.
Willing to fall all the way down to 2.
But now, the vice is locked in.
See a grip full of counter magic and another Pearl Lake Ancient with Oiso at 12. That is just 2 ancient attacks, and Owen is putting the nail in the coffin right now with the second Pearl Lake Ancient.
Seems pretty good.
Draws his card for the turn and turns him sideways, and that's it.
Masashi Osio there, flashing the fact that he had a negate in hand at the end of things. That kind of a nice card against control, but ultimately just awkwardly timed for Masashi Osio to be able to leverage it to get some kind of action going there in the matchup against the number 2 ranked player in the world. But with that match now complete, we are going to get a chance to jump across and see what's going on one of our other tables. And here's a couple of players that we've actually not seen in the feature match area too much thus far. Christian Seibold of Germany, he top-8'd back at the Modern Pro Tour Born on the Gods, and he's up against Joel Calafel. And we have Seibold playing a Sidisi Whip of Erebos deck. We see a Soul of Innistrad in play. And on the other side of things, a slightly more traditional Mardu control deck. So lots of different things going on in the feature match area here. Soul of Innistrad, kind of a cool one in terms of meaning you just never run out of threats.
Right, and you're milling yourself a lot with Sidisi and with Seder Wayfinders and such. Kenji Samura and Shota Yasaoka also playing a deck really similar to this. Seibold even further along the axis of combo, featuring 4 copies of Hornet Queen, along with 4 copies of Whip of Erebos. So he's really kind of all in on that plan. A Murderous Cut, getting the demon out of the way, and this is some beatdown for Seibold.
Yeah, Seibold here able to just say, I've got 2 hands. I've got the hand of cards that I'm holding that are the ones that you naturally draw at the start of the turn, and then I've got all these cards in the graveyard, some of which end up being Lotus Petals to help me cast my Delve spells more cheaply, some of which end up being creatures that I can get back with Soul of Innistrad. He's got access to so much going on with an active graveyard that, I mean, this the power of Delve, this the power of the Sidisi.
I mean, untapping with Soul of Innistrad is utterly unbelievable. I mean, we look at that ability, return 3 cards, raise dead, not usually a constructed effect, but if you think about it as 3 black, draw 3 cards, all of which are threats, the power of the Soul of Innistrad becomes undeniable, and that's probably what's going to happen on Yol's end of turn.
Yeah, Yol here putting up a good fight. Brimaz, King of the Rescos, playing very well with Butcher of the Horde, providing a steady stream of food for the demon if he needs to. But Christian Seibold has an awful lot going on. It looks like more removal there in the form of Hero's Downfall and a Murderous Cut to clear the way. And that's enough to mean that Christian Seibold gets the handshake from Joel Calafell, meaning that he has won that match 2-1, advancing to 10-3. So he's still live to potentially make the top 8 here at this Pro Tour in Hawaii. So we're going to get a chance to have a look at one of the other tables now. Just moving across on the left of our screen, that the multiple-time player of the year, Yuya Watanabe. And he is up against none other than Spencer Garnier from the USA. Now, Spencer, with his Abzan mid-range deck, looks like he's had a pretty reasonable start here. It's actually kind of an aggressive start, really, for a mid-range, with Fleece Mainline and Brimaz, King of the Rescos, slightly larger than the Goblin tokens that have come from Watanabe. And there's also a Siege Rhino there that has been hit by a suspension field, so he's been able to really turn the screws a little bit on Watanabe. Watanabe down to just 7 life now.
Yeah, Watanabe playing the Jeskai deck wins, as players dubbed that, with 2 main deck gods willing. But yeah, Garnier, really aggressive start out of a deck that isn't typically known for that.
And another update for you. The blue-black control decks may not have started out strong this weekend, but they're finishing very well at the moment. Ivan Floch winning 2-1 over Brad Nelson. So congratulations to the winner of Pro Tour Magic 2015. He advances to 10-3, still live for top 8, which is something we can say of fewer and fewer people at this point.
Yeah, we're really entering into the home stretch. This is also a field where a lot of people are clustered around the middle. I mean, several players at 9-3 coming into this match. Normally 9-3 is sort of a stretch for the finish, but a lot of players clustered around there, and no one at undefeated, meaning that it's really anyone's to win at this point.
I mean, the difference in experience between these two players, absolutely huge. I mean, not to knock Spencer Garnier at all, he's having a great tournament, but he's played in 9 Grand Prix total. He qualified here by winning a PCQ. I don't think that he's certainly not played many PTs. We'll double check that potentially later. But yeah, up against Yuya Watanabe, I can fairly confidently say he's played an awful lot less Pro Tours than his opponent.
I think it's a pretty accurate statement.
He has had some Grand Prix top 8s. So Watanabe has had more Grand Prix top 8s, I think, than Garnier has had Grand Prix.
That's an intimidating stat. Oh, wow.
Well, that'll do it. So there's another Siege Rhino from Garnier, meaning that he is able to topple Yuya Watanabe. So the King of the Hill crown, it's just being passed around like past the parcel. No one wants to stay in the feature match area for too long. They want to be able to get out from under the hot lights. It is very hot here in Hawaii. I mean, certainly one of the attractions of being here much of the time, but hard to hold on to the King of the Hill crown.
Well, I think some of that's a reflection of this standard format. I mean, you know, there's a lot of decks that have just really good matchups and really bad matchups. Again, we see a lot of players clustered around now, 9-2 coming to this round at 10-2. I mean, it's really a format where, you know, I mean, I think there were something like 30 players that were X-3. I mean, it's totally unbelievable. We've got everybody fighting. We've got a lot of people taking a lot of different angles on how to approach the format, and nothing has emerged as the clear winner just yet. This isn't one of those tournaments where you look at the top of the standings and it's all one of the super teams playing the same deck that solved everything. It's kind of the exact opposite of that. I mean, I think we're going to see a really diverse top 8 that percolates its way out of the next 3 rounds. And that's a very cool thing for players at every level, because it means that there's a little bit more potential to say, I like playing graveyard-based strategies, so I'm going to play maybe the Sultai deck, similar to what Christian Seibold is doing. Or you like playing combo decks, so, well, you know, there's this Jeskai Ascendancy deck that seems pretty cool and seems competitive. Like, there seems to be something for just about everybody in this standard format, and it's not like there's just one thing that you're like, well, I guess I'm going to have to show up and play against this thing for 5 rounds in a row. Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm excited about is to see what everybody's playing and then go back home and look at Magic Online and figure out how I can combine the best elements of the best performing decks to see if we can take the format in a new direction. I mean, I think we're just getting started on what's likely to be very unexplored territory. I see this format evolving a lot over the course of the standard season. But
thinking more about this tournament initially, we have a chance to speak to Spencer Garnier, who has just done a David and Goliath, really, taking the King of the Hill crown from Yuya Watanabe. Marshall Sutcliffe's down the feature match area. Let's see what they got to say.
Hey guys, welcome to the feature match area. I am here with Spencer Garnier. All the R's pronounced, we have learned. Yeah. Now, you're from Indianapolis. You've got 9 GPs on your resume, and you got here by winning a PTQ.
I did.
So this is your second PT?
It is. It is.
And you so far have only picked up 2 losses in your second PT. That's got to feel pretty good.
Feels pretty good.
Who did you test with to prepare?
I tested with Nerd Rage Games, just a couple of mostly Midwestern players.
And that's a local team that tests, is it one of those ones where everybody who's qualified gets together and tests?
Yeah, pretty much. We just found out one by one we started falling into place as people started winning PTQs, and we just got together in a group. We've been here since Monday, just testing as much as possible.
Wow, so you actually rather come out pretty early and get some testing in. Now, how did that lead you to what you came to for Standard?
We just kind of created a gauntlet and kind of smashed everything against each other, and this is what we came up with.
And how happy are you with the deck's performance so far?
It's all right. I've got a lot of mulligans on my opponent's behalf today, so the deck's fine. Not great, but...
So you're actually not that. So you're not that thrilled with the deck, but it's been really performing well for you based on the fact that your opponents haven't been running well.
Exactly. So.
That's not bad. I guess you got to win one way or another. Now, as you go down the stretch here, are you starting to feel any nerves or any tightness about the fact that you're doing so well at your second Pro Tour?
Not really. I just kind of take it one match at a time and see how I can do my best.
Yeah, I see you got some of your buddies over here wearing a similar shirt to you, and they're trying to tease you and get you. Have they been helping you out throughout the course? Are these your teammates?
They've been super supportive the whole time, so it's really great to have good teammates.
Yeah. So who are your teammates?
I have Danny Goldstein, Jack Fogel, Dan Musser, David Elwood, Josh Milliken, Adrian Troop. How many is that? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Am I forgetting anyone?
They said they can't hear us over here anyway, so it doesn't matter.
There are 9 of us. So
there's 9 of you. So when it comes to goals coming into the Pro Tour, your second one, it's pretty tough to say, I'm coming in there and I'm winning it. But is that actually what you were thinking when you came in?
No, actually, I was just trying to get as many match wins as possible. In Valencia, I 0-5'd. So that was pretty disheartening. And then when I started off 3-0, I just tried to keep going and pick up as many wins as I could.
All right, well, that is my advice to you. Keep going. You're doing well so far, and you're down the stretch here, so stay focused. For now, though, let's head back to the booth where Tim awaits.
Thank you very much, Marshall, and congratulations there, Spencer. A pretty good bounce back after a pretty ropey first PT. Sometimes you just need to get one to kind of shake off the field, get used to the format, get used to how different a Pro Tour is to a Grand Prix or anything else.
Well, I mean, it reminds me of when Reed Duke, basically got last at the first Players' Championships, and you could tell it kind of rattled him, and he basically said, look, this is not going to happen again. The season after that had one of the best performances in Pro Tour history, a crazy Grand Prix tear, did very well in the Player of the Year race. I mean, it's something similar. I think sometimes when you have a finish that you really realize there's a lot more you could have done to get those wins, makes you try that much harder the next time around.
And Spencer there reaping the rewards. But we are now done for round 13, so we're going to head across to the news desk so we can find out a little bit more about what's going on in the tournament in general. But from me, Tim Willoughby, and Zach Hill, we'll say bye for now.
Thanks very much to Tim Willoughby and Zach Hill over in the main feature match area, bringing you all the action. 3 rounds to go now. Things are getting very, very tight at the top. We're going to go away from here just for a few minutes because we had a chance to go inside R&D, having the creative team, the development team, and the designers go inside the 5 clans in Khans of Tarkir. Well, we've already had a look at the Arbzan, so up next it's red, white, and blue. It's time to talk about the Jeskai.